talking about the Flying Tigers, which was an American voluntary Air Force group that fought the Japanese during World War II. And as you can see here, this is a picture of the Flying Tigers, and they were actually the first Americans to fight the Japanese in combat. Um, However, the United States government was officially neutral during the 1930s. Um, so it would have been greatly surprised by the Flying Tigers' actions. And their heroism changed the world. It cemented and forged new alliances, and it also helped to inspire future Flying Tigers to volunteer to train and fight the Japanese. Um, and yeah, whoops. Um, so as you can see here, the Flying Tigers was started by a retired American aviator. His name was General Claire Lee Chenault, and he had this idea to train American fighter pilots in China, and he did so starting in 1937 when he arrived in China, and that was a month before the Japanese full-scale invasion of the rest of China, and he founded his American Voluntary Group, or AVG, and this group eventually became the nucleus of the Flying Tigers. Um, And prior to this, the situation in China, as you can see, the left picture depicts the Manchurian situation, in which Japan occupied all of Manchuria, which was part of northeastern China. And as you can see here, these are some Japanese troops that are posing. Um, and the Japanese used the so-called Mukden incident as a pretext to occupy and create new puppet state Manchukuo. And 6 years later, in 1937, the full-scale invasion of China commenced, with major cities such as Shanghai and Nanjing, which was the then capital of China, falling to the Japanese. So Chiang Kai-shek, who was the nationalist leader at the time, he decided to relocate his capital to a more secure location, namely the city of Chongqing, which was located on the Yangtze River. It was surrounded by mountains, so it was much more difficult for the Japanese to penetrate, since it was deep into the interior of China. In combat, the Flying Tigers were most renowned for their combat skills and excellent aviation tactics. It was mostly thanks to men like Chenault that the Flying Tigers shot down an estimated 300 planes. They only lost around 12 planes themselves. The average Air Force size was about 62 per mission. And due to their combat skills and skillful delaying tactics, the Japanese were unable to fully occupy all of China, and instead only managed to occupy a few key regions around the main part of the country of China, but they were never able to occupy all of it. Another crucial but often overlooked aspect of this war was the supply route known as the Hump. It stretched from India. It started in India, and it went through the Himalayan mountains into northern Burma, and then it went back into China. And this route helped keep Chiang Kai-shek and his government um, alive, and that's why it's a large reason why it survived. And as you can see here, this is like the theater of the war for the Hump, and it was very crucial to the war effort, and that's why many Flying Tiger squadrons were assigned to patrol this route and to protect it from any possible incursions. Um, and one of the difficulties of safeguarding this route was the Himalayan mountains, and this was a natural barrier that basically shielded China from the rest of Asia. So the Flying Tigers had to fly over these treacherous mountains, and many of them died along the way. Um, and one source of fierce contention between General Joseph Stilwell, who was part of the U.S. Army, and Chennault was whether to focus on northern Burma first, which was part of the hump, or to focus on driving out the Japanese in eastern China, which was Chennault's strategy. Ultimately, Chennault's strategy was disregarded, and Stilwell's plan to take northern Burma won out. And in 1942, the AVG was merged into the U.S. Army, although the AVG continued to fight very well until the end of the war. And morale-wise, the AVG inspired people across the United States and China keep on fighting. For example, civilians in the United States learned of the latest developments of flying tigers through their newspapers, especially like and also radio broadcasts. And then civilians in China were also inspired, especially like the workers who created the airstrips and other facilities that were needed for the facilitation of the war effort and the supply route. Morale also improved among Chinese soldiers and the government, since before this, prior to this point, the Chinese army was very disorganized and undisciplined. So it was therefore important for morale to be high in order for the Chinese army to, be able to resist the Japanese. And it also, as I mentioned previously, helped recruit much more flying tigers to the cause, since without this high morale, there would probably be no flying tigers force, and the flying tigers would have probably faded into historical obscurity if it were not for the high morale and camaraderie among the flying tigers, as shown in this picture. And the final slide I'm going to talk about is the historical impact and legacy. And it's important to note that the Flying Tigers were not recognized as a historical entity, and like a fighting force until like 1992, when the United States government finally recognized it. And despite this, there have been many commemorations in the past. For example, in 1985, there was a Flying Tigers reunion, and in 2015, the president of Taiwan met with Anne Chennault, who was the widow of the late Claire Chennault, and you can still see the legacy of the Flying Tigers and today in like commemorations and museums across China, Taiwan, and the United States. For example, in China, there's like the Joseph Stilwell Museum in Chongqing, and then the Flying Tigers Museum in Kunming. And in the United States, there's a really big one in Monroe, Louisiana. I think that's where Chennault grew up or was born in. And it basically has like a bunch of displays, excellent replicas of the Flying Tigers aircraft, and like conditions for the Flying Tigers in general. And although the Flying Tigers are have gotten some recognition over the years, it's been a bit rocky for their historical reputation, to say the least. And I feel like that history textbooks have not covered this crucial event enough. Thank you for listening to my presentation.
Thank you.
Oh, hello, I'm Nathan. I'm in 11th grade, which is a little bit weird in America compared to Taiwan. In America, there was this class called Advanced Placement United States History. I took that class, and I looked through all these textbooks. Like, they're like this big. And what did I find about the Flying Tigers? One paragraph, maybe two. Now, this got me very interested, because in those 2 paragraphs, I heard that the Flying Tigers went to China before Pearl Harbor, and that was really surprising to me. And then I also learned that, they're actually pretty impactful in the war. It also connected to me because I'm also Chinese, but I was born in America. So this story really connected to me. This led me to go look through books, look through videos, look at veterans, see their perspective. But normally, when you look at history books, you focus on the big picture. You look at the political, everything political, you look at the big leaders. But what really interested me were the stories. One story that I found was The Crash of Robert Lee. This story was written in the book God is My Co-Pilot, which was written by Robert L. Scott. Now, this this book had this story in it. Now, this story is all about Robert Lee Scott and about how Robert Lee Scott crashed his plane in the middle of Japan. He had no idea where he was. Now, in this story, you might think, oh, Robert Lee Scott, he's the main character. He is the main character, but he's not who I'm going to be focusing on. In this story, who I want to focus on are the Chinese civilians. What happened after he crashed is he had no food, he had no water, he was injured, he didn't know what to do. But then, when he went up, even though he was a little bit hostile at the beginning because he didn't know where he was, the Chinese citizens, they helped him. They gave him food, they gave him water, they gave him medical attention. There was even an English teacher to translate for him. While he was trying to get back to his friends at the AVG, these citizens, they helped him out. They even were decoys for him. They told him how to avoid getting spotted by Japanese planes. They did so much to help him. In the book, there was a quote that went along the lines of, "These people are the most courageous and willing people I've ever met." And they were super duper caring. I think that this story highlights how in war, it's the little people that can really make a difference as well. The next story that I want to go over is Flying Over the Hump. I believe Patrick already talked a little bit about it, about the supply route over the hump, but I want to expand on it a little bit. So, the hump is the eastern end of the Himalayan mountains, and it was incredibly important. Without the hump, China would have been without resources. It would have been a very, very risky time for everyone. Now, the people that flew supplies over the hump, it isn't just, oh, they flew planes over the hump. Well, it is, but you can go into more detail there. When they were flying their planes over the hump, they had ginormous cargo planes filled to the brim with so much cargo. They were flying 17,000 feet into the air. And then the Himalayan mountains were only about 15,000 feet. They only had 2,000 feet. This man, he's a veteran. His name is Herb Scottberg, I think. But he talked about his story about flying over the hump. How his story went is that when he was flying over those 17,000 feet, suddenly he hit some rough air. Bam! He dropped 2,000 feet in an instant. That is what these pilots had to go through. They experienced these traumatic moments, and he saw his friends experience those same moments. And some of his friends probably did not make it back. But even though that happened, he went across and went back and went across and went back 50 times. Even though these traumatic moments happened, he went back 50 times. Because even though delivering supplies isn't a glamorous job, they're not going to write books about you, they're not going to make movies. They did it because they knew it was the right thing. They knew that if they did this, then China would be in a lot better space. Even though that they were foreigners, they were Americans, they didn't really know exactly, they didn't have the exact patriotism for China that they had in America. They recognized that if they do this, they're going to be saving lives. And that's what's really important. The next story is the building of the runway. Now, last story highlighted the AVG and about how they're very, very brave in their pursuit to save lives. This one is about a local people in Tanggu. Tanggu was one of the AVG's first bases. Now, in the early times of their flight, a Japanese bomber bombed their runway. this is really bad. If you know how planes work, you can't take off without a runway. So they couldn't defend the skies like they meant to. So they didn't really know what to do. They could fix the runway, but it would take a really long amount of time. This is when local mayor and a lot of local citizens came together. They said, no, I'm not just going to go stand here and just, live out during the war. I'm going to go help. They, with no experience, and this was the very early times of the AVG, so they didn't really specifically know who they were. They went out there and they helped build that runway. They helped build the runway very slowly from night to day. They just helped build the runway. This meant that the runway was done in just a couple of days. Well, it was done in a lot shorter of a time than normal, which meant that the AVG could go soar the skies again. This story really shows about how local people who don't really know exactly what's going on can still make a very large difference in the war. What I think the moral is of this entire story is that either way you look over it, history glosses over the little people. It sometimes glosses over the small people and focuses on the big politics. This the leader, this the leader. But at the end of the day, wars aren't fought by pieces of paper, some numbers on the screen, or just even some historical text. It's fought by people. It's fought by people who are willing to step up to the plate and hit the bat. Thank you for listening. How do I click forward?
With the very significant and great stories that Nathan and Patrick just told comes a very significant historical significance and a great legacy for the Flying Tigers, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today. As Patrick mentioned, in 1942, the AVG or Flying Tigers, they were officially transitioned into the U.S. Air Force, and they were replaced with the 23rd Fighter Group. Now some of the fighters of the AVG chose to remain with the 23rd Fighter Group and keep fighting the war in Asia, but a lot of them assimilated back into civilian life in the US, and others chose to keep fighting in different parts of the war, acting as either transport pilots, or fighting in the Pacific. Now General Hsiao, he was promoted to Brigadier General in 1942, and as Brigadier General, his role expanded to oversee all air operations within China. And now the Flying Tiger was made up of many significant pilots. They're credited with having 19 aces, and that means 19 pilots had 5 or more air-to-air victories or shot down 5 or more aircraft during the war. And as Patrick mentioned, they shot down an estimated 300 enemy aircraft, with 229 of them being in air-to-air combat, which is extremely significant and demonstrates the great impact they had within Asia. However, beyond Asia, these pilots had great impact as well. Charles Older was an ace within the AVG, and after the war, he went back to California and he actually earned a law degree and became a California Superior Court judge, which is extremely significant. And then another one called Kenneth Jernstead went back to America and started his own cargo transport airline, and this was the first ever cargo transport airline, and he called it the Flying Tiger Line to pay homage to his origins. And then General Chennault had a great impact outside of the war. He started the Civil Air Transport, which was used to help Nationalist China and Chiang Kai-shek. And what he did was he took surplus military aircraft from America, and through the Civil Air Transport, he would give it to Nationalist China and help them transport troops and supplies and help their cause. And he was a great supporter of Chiang Kai-shek and Nationalist China. Furthermore, he advocated in the U.S. Congress for a more even spread of foreign aid, specifically towards Asia and places like Nationalist China. However, one pilot that I want to highlight in particular is Squadron Coach Gregory Boyington, and he's also known as Pappy. Now, he initially joined the U.S. Marine Corps, but he left to join the AVG because the AVG paid more than the Marine Corps did, and it was easier to progress in the ranks. In an interview he did with the Air Force magazine shortly before his death in 1988, he said that the AVG handed out significant bonuses for each enemy aircraft you shot down, and had a higher base salary than the U.S. Air Force. And his salary is equivalent to about 5,000 US dollars a month today. So that means he made $60,000 a year before bonuses of killing any enemy aircraft. Now, with these bonuses, he definitely earned a lot more because I believe he was credited with shooting down 29 enemy aircraft in total. And he was awarded the highest U.S. military award, which is the Medal of Honor. And he is definitely one of the greatest pilots to come out of the AVG. Now, with their legacy, they're honored in many museums and memorials around the world. Um, the most significant of which is probably the United States Air Force Museum, which is in Dayton, Ohio, but they are highlighted across the world. Um, Specifically, there's a Flying Tigers Museum in Kunming, China, as mentioned by Patrick. And also, there are many more small memorials around the world. For instance, in Thailand, at the site of a downed Flying Tigers plane, the plane is preserved actually at the Thai Air Force Museum, and you can go see it if you want. And also, in Chongqing, China, every year on Qingmingjie, or uh they clean the tomb of a fallen flying tiger pilot, which really demonstrates the respect that they have for the flying tigers and their pilots. And now there are many more memorials like across the world, um some big, some small. But in Taiwan specifically, Madame Chiang Kai-shek, who is closely related to General Chennault, um asked for a statue of General Chennault to be erected in Taiwan's national park, but that has since been moved to one of Taiwan's Air Force bases. And also, in Chennault's hometown of Monroe, Louisiana, the university there changed their mascot to be the Warhawks to honor the Flying Tigers. And of course, although they aren't covered that much in conventional history textbooks that we may read from as students, there are many specialized books that cover the Flying Tigers and are helping preserve their legacy. Thank you.